Can open relationships work?
This is a good one, man.
We are coming in hot, dude. It's bright and early in the morning. We've gotten this question so often online. I can't tell you how many times people have DM'd us. Can open relationships work? Today, we're actually going to get into this on this episode. And what we're going to do is actually divide out each of our thoughts into kind of different segments. We're going to define what it is. We're going to go through success rates. We're going to talk statistics, and we're going to give you kind of our overall thoughts as we get to the end of this. But why don't we start from the top? Are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
Okay. From the top, I think it's important first that we actually define open relationships versus monogamy versus polyamory, because they're all different. And granted, we generally know what monogamy is. We don't necessarily follow it, but we know what that is. But why don't you give us a quick definition?
It's being faithful to one partner.
Yeah, one intimate partner, that is monogamy. We know that definition. But how about open relationships versus polyamory? Because this is one that we often kind of confuse or we think is interchangeable, and in reality, they're not.
Yeah, and it's true, because when you watch, doing the research on this, like the magazines would be like, they would interchange the words, but they have totally different connotations.
Very different.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with polyamory? Polyamory is the idea that you can basically have multiple intimate relationships. So really it's like, and I think they often refer to them as pods, right? Where you have multiple people. It could be 2 guys, 2 girls. It could be 3. It could be whatever it is. But each of them have a close and intimate relationship with one another. And it can be sexual, but it doesn't have to be either.
Yeah. And then putting the judgment away, it's their belief that that's realistic, that it's unrealistic to just love one partner and to be faithful to one partner. You need to explore and have multiple partners, because love is ever expanding and you need that experience.
Yeah. And it's also of the belief that like we are built and designed to love more than one person. And so that's kind of the concept of polyamory, but that's very different from open relationships.
Yeah, because open relationships, it's more of the sexual nature. You're having sex. And then a lot of the times, like even working with couples that were having open relationships in our coaching program, one of the rule sets was once you start to feel deep feelings for the person that you're having sex with, you need to discuss it or even cut that relationship off.
Yeah. So open relationships, we would define as the prioritization of one intimate relationship, but being basically okay. It's a consensual relationship of where you can go and explore your sexual needs with other people. It's very much a physical intimacy type thing where you're just, I don't want to say intimacy. I want to just say sex. It's really about having sex with more than one partner, but remaining intimate and close to one. So there's a lot of boundaries and rules as to what's okay and what's not okay that the couple will agree to.
Yeah. And it's monitoring the emotional component. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to have feelings for the person that you're with, but once it exceeds a level that might hurt the relationship, that's where you have to cut it off.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we have this clear separation between monogamy, open relationships, and polyamory, we have to say that what we're talking about in this episode is open relationships. We have studies that kind of are going to back up each of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk from clinical experience. We're even going to talk about, what factors can actually help a relationship to succeed if this is something that they want to explore. But if we're not talking polyamory, because that really needs a separate episode and separate research altogether.
Absolutely. There's a lot of components with that one.
Yes. Okay. So open relationships, let's assume that, we're basically talking now that we're in a marriage or we're in a partnership. This is the long-term relationship. This is the intimate connection. And you say something like, I want to explore my sexual needs outside of the relationship. Let's agree to this. So we consent to this. And I say, I'm okay with an open relationship. Just don't tell me what you're doing. I just don't really want to know about it, but I'm okay with you doing it. This is one example of what that would be. But this is what we're going to talk about. So why don't we first go into the next piece of this? Monogamy versus open relationships. Let's talk the success rate of each of these.
This is crazy, right? So when you look at monogamy and then just divorce rates in general, it's about 50%.
Yeah. Depending on there's a lot of factors, right? Different studies, socioeconomic factors. You're looking at different countries, different regions. It can range between 30 to 70%, but we usually just settle on that 50% number.
Yeah, it's around 50%, right? So, however, when you look at open relationships, the success rate is 8%.
8%.
8%.
Okay. So 8% of the time, you're saying that once they agree, once they consent to an open relationship, 8% of those are actually going to make it to become long-term relationships at that point?
Yeah. And then that's a 92% fail rate.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of, once again, from an imagination standpoint, it sounds like, wow, this is great and this can work out. But there's so many different factors that can actually hurt this relationship.
Yeah. That came from a specific study, right? Do you want to mention that?
So this came from Brody, who did this research study. And basically what they were saying when they were studying open relationships, they're trying to figure out like, what's the success rate? What are the key factors that make it work? And then, why does it fail?
Yeah. Well, that same study also concluded that basically older generations had a harder time being successful in open relationships compared to younger generations, right?
Yeah. And that totally makes sense, right? Because if you look at the older generations, the traditional social concept of marriage, right? Husband and wife. Mm-hmm. The wife kind of stays home. The man kind of works. And it's kind of evolved. But that mentality, if you believe in that construct of what relationships are, you trying an open relationship, it's not going to work because you're not equipped for that. Whereas this newer generation, when it comes to like open relationships and then exploring yourself, even the concept of gender is changing. They're more equipped to handle what an open relationship offers. And that's why like when it comes to the 8% success rate, it's the younger generation. They're the ones that are actually succeeding.
The younger generation is pushing the envelope with a 15% success rate.
They're progressive, man. They're progressive. See, I don't want to be the old guy. See, this is where I don't want to be the old guy. It's like, get off my lawn, right? Like maybe we just don't understand.
No, I mean, I'm not speaking from a judgmental standpoint. It's more of a funny standpoint because no matter how you look at it, we can look at like, it's very likely that the younger generation is going to be more successful when they take on an open relationship than where we are today, right? That 8% number is going to probably go up, but it's still very, very low. When you look at, okay, older generations maybe have a 2 to 4% success rate. Younger generations have a 12 to 16% success rate. We're still looking at a very challenging and difficult relationship dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, to make the other argument, I would say that it's evolving, right? Mm-hmm. So you can take from the standpoint of doing open relationships, it's at its early evolutionary period. And then from a social construct lens, it's trying to move itself where it becomes more of the norm.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't think you agree with that.
I don't necessarily agree or disagree. I think 100 years from now, this concept is going to be way more fluid than it is today. So I think a lot of where we're at today in our understanding of this is heavily socially programmed through everything that we've been indoctrinated with, from religion to just cultural norms to all that stuff. So it'd be naive to say that 100 years from now this isn't going to be normalized, or maybe it's going to be even that much more successful. But I still think, just from a practical perspective, it presents a lot of potential pitfalls.
For sure.
I don't think it's so much I guess my issues with open relationships really has nothing to do with the concept so much as it has to do with the flaws of each individual. A relationship between two people is already difficult enough because of the different trauma and different, attachments and all the personal experiences and values that we bring into the relationship. As soon as you start expanding this to open relationships where you're now doing other things and potentially hiding things, that becomes a really significant factor and issue in the relationship.
Yeah, I think, once again, I think the counter argument to that is because you're placing so much expectation on the one partner, which they can't fulfill. So if you spread it out, you're reducing expectations and hopefully that relationship would work out.
Yeah, well, at least you're reducing the sexual expectations of that relationship for sure. This kind of nicely brings us to part 3 of this conversation, which is, why are open relationships even desirable? Don't look at me like I'm crazy right now.
Come on, man. You're living the dream, man.
I got Dr. Glen's eyes looking at me like, are you serious? Are you serious? It's obvious.
I mean, at least conceptually. Conceptually, you could have multiple partners, you have freedom, because oftentimes people think that it's too restricting or they imagine what it would be like out there. So you get to actually do that.
Yeah. Well, most of the time, I feel like people are that buy into this concept. And I don't mean to talk, I have to be honest, I am talking from the standpoint of I don't necessarily buy into open relationships. I don't think it's a good format. So that's kind of part of the conclusion that when we talk about well, where do we both stand on this? But I have to say that bias is there on my side. I do find, though, looking at this from just a non-judgmental lens, most of the time when people say that monogamy doesn't work, it generally has to do with the idea of just sex, that we're programmed to have sex with more than one person. Do you see something else in this that I'm missing?
Well, I mean, I think besides the sex component, just the emotional experiences that you're limiting it to one person. I think that's the counter argument.
Well, okay. And what I'm going to say to criticize this is that I see an overvaluing of sex in a relationship in general. When we look at open relationships, there tends to be this overvaluing of sexual intimacy and an undervaluing of emotional intimacy. Because when people say monogamy doesn't work, it really depends on what lens you're looking at, right? Like, are we looking at monogamy from the standpoint of like what you're giving up or what you're gaining? If we're looking at it from what you're giving up, then okay, monogamy doesn't work because you're giving up having sex with more than one person, right? But if you're looking at at emotional intimacy, at being close and having a deep connection, then monogamy most certainly works.
Yeah, but I mean, where did you learn that from, though? Right? That's a social construct. It's like it's more of a traditional lens, right? So from that lens, that is the ultimate that you're seeking when it comes to intimacy in a relationship. Whereas I would say the other people from the open relationship standpoint would say it's not really that sacred, right? Like even the construct of marriage itself, when you watch The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, Love is Blind, do they make it that sacred? It's really not that sacred, right? So you mean
what's sacred versus not sacred? You mean just having sex with somebody is not that sacred?
The sex and then the intimacy components, right? So like the open relationship is, in that lens, they're saying that that's actually more realistic, right? If you take kind of this is the most important thing. Like if you take that out, this is actually a more realistic way of having relationships. And like I said, for me, like I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. Working with clients that we've had, like in my way, I'm just trying to understand it and then just trying to see from that lens, like from a non-judgmental view to say, hey, I want to understand this as much as I possibly can. Okay,
so from again going back to a non-judgmental view, right? If we just talk purely science, because you're saying that I'm seeing it from a social programming lens, and I'm not completely disagreeing with that, but I am going to say this: I'm really seeing it more from a psychological lens. Like if we were to look at Dunbar's number, right? Dunbar's number is a number of like how many our brains are inherently limited to how many close connections we can create, and that number of like most intimate relationships is very low. Like we can only deeply connect with a few people, right? It's a very small number. And that number kind of supports, just from a brain standpoint, that we're not really wired to have multiple intimate relationships with different people, right? You could argue like, okay, well, at least it supports that we should have 2 or 3. And I'm not going to say anything on that line. But the only piece of why open relationships seem to be desirable is the biological component of having sex with multiple partners. And that would mean to me that like, okay, we're really placing a lot of emphasis and a lot of value on that, as opposed to, let's say, the emotional intimacy. That's where I'm coming from.
But what I'm saying is that what defines monogamy is not having sex with another person, right? So they're really valuing sex on that lens, right? So if you take the sex component out, on this other lens, you're basically saying that sex isn't that important. You can still have a really intimate relationship with someone, but yet still explore your sexuality and have relationships with other people.
True. But what we would both probably agree on in this area is that open relationships is really more about having sex with multiple partners, not necessarily having intimate relationships with those partners, right? Because I think that often gets misconstrued too. Like a lot of times people say, I want to have an open relationship because I want to explore this emotional connection and being intimate and close with more than one person and all this kind of stuff. But I think that's complete bullshit.
Yeah. So once again, I didn't know too much until like we basically had 2 clients, and then there was one couple where it was clear like one of the partners did not want to do it. Mm-hmm. And then they went into it and they were trying to cover up things that were not working in the relationship. But that was like the wrong agenda. However, there was another couple, like they had things that they wanted to work out. But genuinely on both sides, they both felt like, I cannot give you all of your emotional needs. So the loving thing to do is to actually give you the space to explore things that I cannot give you and be okay with that. And that was genuine. Like, so it was like such a sincere space. It gave me a different lens of understanding of like, okay, I could kind of see where this is kind of coming from. Like there's a purity to that.
I get it from that standpoint, but if we're being honest, you and I can love more than one. I mean, I do love more than just my partner, right? I love more than just Yen. I love you. I love your wife. I love Anthony. I have a lot of friends that are in my inner circle and I love them. I'm not having sex with them, but I am deriving emotional benefit and intimacy in different levels from each of these different relationships. So you can be monogamous and still get those emotional benefits met. And the reason why I say that it's flawed in this area is because within an open relationship, we're not talking about polyamory, where that emotional connection, that deep sense of connection is encouraged with each person. In open relationships, there's generally a sort of contract, a love contract that's consented upon between those two individuals that defines what they can and cannot do with these relationships. And in many instances, when they get too close, they're supposed to cut it off.
I agree, because you have to prioritize that relationship.
Correct.
Agreed.
And that tells me that this is more so about the physical nature of the open relationship versus the emotional nature of what's being done. Because I could get my emotional needs fulfilled by friends, by family, by a number of different relationships with people that I'm not having sex with.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting, because then it goes back to like psychological constructs, like Freud, who believes everything is sexual, right? So like he would argue that an open relationship is probably healthy because you're exploring your sexuality and you're experiencing that out, versus like if you're in a monogamous relationship but you're working out really hard and you're doing all these other physical activities, you're just transferring it into something else.
Freud would also probably argue that when I invite you to work out, I really want to you.
No, I don't think so. I would think he's arguing that we're taking out a lot of that sexual energy that we have in other ways.
All right.
Yeah.
Agree to disagree. So why are these relationships desirable? There can be a number of things, but I think ultimately it comes down to the want, the need to have sex with multiple partners.
Yeah. And then the one thing I want to do is I just want to take like a different lens, like understand it from like a more holistic point of view or like a more pure point of view, which that was educational for me. Like to see that, like, this is love. I really see this as love on both sides. So that was really fascinating to me.
Which aspect? Like when you say this is love on both sides? Like,
because the construct of like, oh, I'm showing you love because we're committed to each other, and it's just us, and sexually it's just going to be us, versus that's not really realistic, and I'm limiting you, so you need to explore, I can explore, and that's really loving somebody. There was a purity to that, like when I saw the perspectives on both partners.
Before we continue, we have an incredible guide that's completely free to download. It's a core value workbook and guide that's going to help you to understand your core values. It's going to help you understand kind of our overall process and what we do, help you to better know yourself, as well as what's going on in the relationships that you're creating and your personal life. It's completely free. You guys can find it from the link in our bio, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in our description. And with that, let's go to the next point. What's necessary to succeed in an open relationship? I think people will see less bias from me in this one, because I'm going to say, if you want to go this route, here are some things.
Yeah, there's some conditions. So one, be younger, like from the statistics, right?
Let's say that's off the table. We can't be younger. We would say number one would be actually the relationship needs to be in a very healthy place.
Yeah. So it means that on both partners' side, they feel like an open relationship is a healthy thing. It's about growth and expansion. It's about opportunity, and it's an equal way of expressing love, and there's buy-in on both sides.
Yeah. And a big key piece in this is that there's prioritization of the primary relationship. So that always has to take precedence over everything else, basically.
Yeah. And then they don't believe that there's anything missing in the relationship. They're just in a really good place.
That's a big one, because oftentimes we might think of going into an open relationship because physical intimacy is lacking, because we're not getting what we need from an emotional standpoint, right? We're not close enough. We're not this. But again, the limitations of the open relationship usually prevent like deep emotional connections, not even just from the love contract itself. The love contract is one thing where we're going to define out how close you can get to other people, and we're going to spell that out. But the second factor is just our own biological limitation. You can only maintain a certain number of deeply close, intimate relationships. We're talking, depending on who you are, I'd say for me personally, it's 1. For others, maybe it's 2, maybe potentially 3. But for most people, you're going to find that the closer you get to somebody, the more naturally distant you are with someone else.
No, agreed, right? So once again, with that premise, if it's in a healthy space, it's recognizing that this is going to be a lot of work.
Yes.
It's a lot of work on both ends. It's going to put more work into this relationship. And so therefore, it's a huge commitment to make this choice.
Okay. Factor number 2, it actually has to be a mutual decision.
Yeah, it can't be coerced, right? So, you know, in one of the couples where...
How would you coerce me? Let's just do that. We're a partner.
I'm not satisfying your needs. I don't like jujitsu.
Oh, you're telling me to go have an open relationship.
So yeah, so you should...
I thought you were going to, you know, ask for the open relationship.
Oh, that's how I'm asking. I'm coercing you into doing it. Man.
You're coercing me into doing it. So I stop asking
I'm making it seem like you should want to do it.
Okay. Yeah, got it. It went a little bit of a different way than I thought, but okay, let's keep this moving. Not with the role playing. I'm done with the role playing.
Oh, we're not role playing anymore.
But just with you can't coerce your partner into this from either side, right? Whether it's me convincing you that I should get an open relationship, or it's me convincing you that you should have an open relationship. That doesn't work.
It has to be a shared decision.
Yeah.
The belief system is that it's good for you. It's good for me. We're both exploring and we support each other's exploration in this process.
Yeah. The next factor for success would be having a healthy and mutually agreed upon, basically, relationship contract. It's our open relationship agreement, right?
Yeah. And this is hugely important, right? So like, you know, in terms of like what happens when you start to have deep feelings for someone, but just like general rules too, like when are you going to come home and how much information do we share about, you know, what we're doing with other people and how much does each person want to know? You know, are we practicing safe sex? What's our sex schedule, right? So there's a lot of different factors that have to be discussed. It's put in this contract. It's an open dialogue that's taking place. And then the biggest thing here is veto power, right? So that was one of the biggest things that were discussed, which is basically if you feel uncomfortable with one of the relationships that I'm in and it's hurting our relationships, then you have veto power to say, you know what? I think you should cut this off.
Let's talk more about the veto power in 1 second. Going back to the contract, though, from your clinical experience, are you talking about this contract being like a verbal agreement, or is this actually put into writing?
It's actually put into writing. It's a written contract. It covers everything from the emotional lens about like how far you can go emotionally, and then just safety issues, practicing safe sex, you know, making sure that there's no STDs involved, the health of the relationship. All of that is put down in that contract.
So if you maybe had trouble creating a prenuptial agreement, this might be a very significant issue to create. The open relationship agreement might be even more of a challenge.
It's like a postnuptial.
It's like a postnuptial. Well, it's even more complicated than a postnuptial.
But we're staying together, but we're still exploring.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine the level of communication skills and openness. And again, going back to emphasizing the relationship has to be so rock solid in its foundation for both individuals for an agreement like this to even just be agreed upon, even just to be formed.
Yeah. So the myth that, oh, this is just two horny people that are just doing it just because they're doing it. It's really not true. There's so much work and time and effort that's put into it.
Well, often it is true. It's just those aren't the ones that are actually successful at it.
That's the 92%,
That's
right?
the 92% that are failing. So the last piece you mentioned, kind of the final piece of being successful in an open relationship came down to veto power. And that's really goes back to number 1, which was not only is the relationship in that healthy state, but it's also the prioritization of the primary relationship, right? Where if I'm not okay with you doing something, you have to prioritize this over everything else.
Yeah. So, you know, if I'm in a relationship and then you start to feel like it's hurting our relationship or my emotions are swaying in this way where I'm not prioritizing you anymore, then you have veto power to say, I don't think this is a relationship that you should keep.
Okay. So why don't we go to the flip side of this now and discuss why do open relationships fail? You know, I got a lot to talk about on this side. So why don't you take this?
I mean, number 1, it's a huge level of commitment mentally, physically, emotionally. It's a lot of time and effort, right? So just everything that we discussed, right? The contracts, the discussions, the health of the relationship. There's so many factors that you have to, you know, factor in to actually make this decision. So it's a huge investment on all levels.
You know what I think on this side is the first thing that popped in my head is just, I ain't got time for this shit. I don't have the time for this. I don't have time to create this agreement. I don't have time once the agreement is made to actually go out and look for people to date. There are so many other things that I'd rather be doing than this. But, again, this is just my personal bias. I ain't got time. But I'm thinking of that side, the emotional commitment, the time commitment. It's extensive.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then you're right. The dating, the meeting people, do we get along, activities, all of the different components that are involved.
I got to go to Costco and find a pineapple and throw that shit upside down and put it in my cart. Don't you know about this?
No.
Oh my goodness. Dr. Glen. That's the sign of, I think that's the sign of swingers, actually. The upside down pineapple.
Why is that a sign of swingers?
I don't know. That's what they do. It's upside down pineapple. It's like how you show.
Oh, that you're a swinger?
I'm a swinger.
Oh, at Costco. So other members would know.
Maybe the upside down pineapple. I'm sure one of our viewers would have more knowledge on this than we do. And you can let us know what is the appropriate sign for an open relationship, but it could just also be the pineapple. I'm sure it'll work.
Yeah. So upside down pineapple, the open shirt, the chest hair. All
It's more than just for Brazilian steakhouses.
No, that's what I was thinking of. Like, ooh, I'm hungry.
No. Yeah, you are hungry for something else. Okay, so why do open relationships fail? Well, another factor is that from research, we actually know like there's certain personality types that are going to just inherently fail at this. If you are jealous or let's say anxious attached to your partner,
you should not do an open relationship, right? So you have to be really like not the jealous type. Like if you're obsessed and like, where'd you go and what are you doing? This is not something that you should be doing.
Not for you
at all.
And then the second side of this was kind of going back to earlier, like if you're using this to fix something in the relationship, these two things.
Oh, emotionally, we don't talk much. So I'm going to find someone else that, I can talk to. And then also we're not that physical anymore. So I'm going to find someone else.
Yeah. One of the interesting pieces of this was one of the biggest reasons open relationship fail is, again, the opposite of what we said, why they succeed, but it's not a mutual decision. But oftentimes they don't necessarily know that going into it. One person does feel coerced, but they're either not recognizing that feeling or they're not communicating that feeling. And the other person's going into it thinking like, hey, this is, both of us agreed to this. Why are you having such an issue with it? When in reality, they might have agreed, but they really didn't.
Yeah. From what you're saying, I would argue that basically you have two people that have this similar social construct of marriage, and then they're just trying to fix the marriage and they think that they want to do it, but they really don't.
Yeah, that's a tough one because again, like when we say, well, in order for this to succeed, the relationship has to have such a secure foundation. Part of the problem is that more often than not, and we're talking like, again, 92% of the cases, right? Well, one person just doesn't feel comfortable enough to let the other one know that I just really don't want to do this. And so they end up being coerced. And it goes back to, again, like part of being that secure is that you can openly state that this is, not for me.
And that's why it fails, because that's where resentment breeds in. Mm-hmm. You're doing something that you don't want to do. And then it's killing the physical and emotional intimacy. Mm-hmm. And it's just pushing your partner away.
And again, going back to the 92% number, if we were to say, what is the fourth reason that this fails is because the majority of people entering into this are doing it for some sort of compensation effect. They're trying to make up for something. They're trying to save the marriage, the relationship. I might agree to your open relationship idea because I think that's going to be the thing that helps us to make it.
Yeah, like direct example, like if we believe that we're in a healthy space and that this is a good thing, I'd be like, Pye, you hooked up yesterday. Tell me about it. Who is she? That's amazing.
That's so weird.
Genuinely and sincerely. Like, I really believe
that very judgmental. I'm sorry.
I believe like, dude, this is awesome. Oh, dude, I got my date tomorrow, man. I got my date tomorrow. She's really cool too. Right. And then it's this belief like, yeah, that's awesome, man. That's really, really cool.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to bring what you just did into like my practical everyday life.
To your brain.
It's not working. It's not working. My brain's like, bleh.
Yeah, like I said,
like if you were to imagine that just on a practical level, could you have that kind of could you even have that conversation with the boys?
So that's what I'm saying. So for me, through this process, like over this past year, like I had all those judgments come in. And then when I saw the one that was actually like on that lens, it looked healthy. I was like, wow, this is different. It changed my lens a little bit.
Yeah.
So it opened me up. So it opened my eyes.
Yeah, what Dr. Glen is saying right now is I am a closed-minded MFer.
Yes, you're not evolved, my man.
Okay. I'm going to say I've watched a lot of the shows. I appreciate the shows. I can't wrap my head around it.
I mean, like I said, I think we're at this, all jokes aside, like we're just trying to understand it and trying to gain more knowledge about it.
Well, then I guess this is the perfect piece to take us into the last part. And I'm going to ask you this. Plain, simple, Dr. Glen, what do you think about open relationships? Would you recommend them?
I think honestly, it's like a generational thing. So like for me, if you say personally, like I would not recommend it because I have my own beliefs about what relationships are. However, being on the college campus, being with students and then seeing something different. And that's why I always feel like when they say stuff, get off my lawn, like I'm that old man, right? I could see it working. Because as a social, I think like, from a social construct lens, everything is changing, like what a man is, what a woman is, what marriage is. I think it's evolving and I think it's moving in that direction where it will kind of equal marriage. It'll be like 50%.
Okay. Part 2 to that question. Could you see it working if you had children?
Yeah. Because similarly, like, if you get married and you get divorced and you blend the families, right? Similar thing, like you're redefining what family means, right? It goes to this construct of extending, like your neighbors are your family. So in that, like I said, I could see it from that lens. Like you would have to have a total change in a social construct, and it would have to be more accepted, and then it evolves to this space where that's what people do, and that's how I kind of see it. Like with the whole concept of gender identity, being fluid. It's moving to me, like it's moving in that direction already. It's just in its earlier stages. And that's why like the success rate is 8%. And I think eventually it's just going to become a norm.
Oh boy. I don't see it from that same lens. I mean, I can see it from the lens of like, if somebody else wants to do this, like in terms of like our coaching, in terms of therapy, I think it's the role of a therapist, of a coach to support whatever someone else's vision is for their relationships. So I would always support that from the standpoint of like, if it's your vision for your relationships, I'm going to give you the best tools to hopefully be successful in it. Would I recommend this? No. I mean, simple numbers of 92% failing, that's enough by itself. But even like, let's say that these other things, like the social construct nature, I get that. I know that monogamy is socially programmed. I know that these things exist, but there's also another component of this, of just the brain, the psychological limitations of how close we can be to different people. I know for me personally that as I've gotten closer to one person, I've naturally distanced from another. That happens in my friendships. It happens in my romantic relationships. And again, like for me, Yen is that person that I'm most close to, right? So from just a biological side, I don't see that sense of connection and intimacy being possible when we're in this like open kind of scenario. And I see all the other pitfalls with it. And one of those pitfalls is I have 4 kids. So, okay, let's take everything else off the table. Do you choose to tell your kids exactly what you're doing? Or do you choose to hide it from them and wait till they're older? Because either way, you're going to be dramatically changing the way that they view love, the way that they, everything, right? And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. Well, I would say lying to them would be wrong, because what's going to happen is they grow up and then they realize that mom and dad were in an open relationship the entire time, and they think they've been lied to their entire life. So the only way to go about that properly with kids would be to actually explain to them your beliefs on this and why it is that you're doing it.
No, I get the moral argument that you're making. And once again, the lens is coming from like our upbringing, right? Because it's about socialization, it's about community and friendships, right? But let's be realistic here, right? What's going on with society now, right? Technological advances. Aren't people more isolated now? Less intimate relationships? Everything is through the computer and through your phone, right? So as this sacrament of marriage is dying, right? This commitment and this communal sense is dying. Well, what's the next step when it comes to relationships then? It's moving in that direction, right? So to me, like I said, I don't have children, but I see kids, and then even like the stories, like some of them, like, in class when they talk about like sex, it's a different lens. Like it's the way that it's viewed, the way that it's different, right?
Sure.
So,
but it's not the same as like divorce. And here's my point is that like, when it comes to what I'm talking about in terms of this, right, the open relationship side, if you are in a healthy relationship, if you're in a good place, I'll speak from my perspective, right? I love my wife. My family's incredible. Like I love the life that we have at home and what we're building together. The benefits, I do see there being like potential small benefits in an open relationship, being able to have multiple intimate partners. I mean, as a guy, that sounds great. You know, like the on paper, that sounds great. But you have to know that you're playing with fire, that you're potentially putting everything else up on the chopping block to have this extra thing in your life.
Agreed. You're viewing it from your lens of culture and tradition and our age. This is where I think our age comes into play, because let's look at the reality for younger kids, right? Are kids going to buy houses? Are the kids now, are they able to afford houses right now? The majority going to be renters, right?
Yeah, depending on where you live, but yeah.
Yeah, the majority going to be renters. Everything is technologically online. There's more isolation. You know, if you look at where it's going, so if you're not, and then they're having less kids. So then this construct of community and family, if you take the kid component away, you take the marriage component away, it's going to become these open style relationships where you get your intimacy from. That's my perspective. That's how I see it.
Well, I don't see it as like, I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. I'm saying that that's not the solution I would recommend. Like the solution I would recommend is getting back into the community, like developing the community and developing your friendships and other relationships and that. I guess what we were talking about is, what do you think? What is your recommendation? And that's why I'm giving my recommendation. And for me, when I look at the concept of an open relationship, there's simply, you know, if you could be part of the 8%, or maybe in the future it's skyrocketed. To skyrocket that number, by the way, you're talking about 20%. That would be over 200% improvement in the success of these relationships, right? So let's say that number goes up. You'd still have to be willing to put everything up on the block to say like, okay, this is worth trying, even though I know every other thing could potentially go south. And so that's the lens that I'm looking at it from, is this. What if your partner gets infatuated with someone else? What if they lose their sense of intimacy with you? What if you're the one that happens to? What if this connection with somebody else turns into a full-blown emotional affair and now you don't even love your spouse anymore? These are all possibilities. What about the children growing up and having a very skewed sense of you know, everything? Well, dad was actually out on Friday nights on dates with other women, as opposed to spending time with the family, as opposed to spending time in the marriage. Mom was choosing to spend time dating someone who wasn't in the family.
No, I get what you're saying, you know, and then I think what you're saying is that like you should still practice monogamy and have a relationship in that way. And I totally get your point. What I'm saying though is that if you take that out and you just kind of look at the way things are going, it just looks like it's just heading in that direction.
Yeah, I don't argue with the way it looks like it's heading, because it does look like, you know, it's heading in a direction where all these things are less valued. I'm still going to hold, and I'm also going to say this, it really depends on what you're building. It depends on what your goals are.
It's the quality of the relationship. To me, like it doesn't matter. Like it's the quality of the relationship, whether you have an open relationship or not, right? Because the sacrament of marriage, if you have a bad marriage, well, they're going to the strip clubs. They're coming home late.
For sure.
With their buddies, right? So it's,
and that's garbage too.
All the things that you're talking about, like it comes out in other forms where like it's just a damaged relationship that's not working. And so this is say like, you know, I would say the argument that, well, monogamy in itself is the answer. Ultimately, it's just about having a quality relationship where we go back to the core values. And as long as the values match and it's really genuine and sincere, and you build a quality relationship where we're like all relationships are the same, then great. And if you can pull that off and that quality of the relationship is there, whether it's open, whether it's not, it has a really good chance of succeeding.
Sure. And I'm not even going to argue with like I'm not going to talk about what a person should do or shouldn't do. It's more so going back to like, what type of lifestyle and what type of relationships do you want to be creating?
Yeah.
Because my recommendation would be based on that. If what you value is family, a deep, intimate connection with one person, if that is the priority, monogamy is the route.
Probably that's not the way to do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
But if family is not a big of a thing, maybe you don't want kids, or maybe you want kids, but you don't mind, showing them this lifestyle. And maybe you want not necessarily as deep of a connection. You want deep connections, but maybe you want semi-deep connections with multiple people, or with, then it's like, okay, I could see that working.
Can I blow your mind even more? So that the couple that we're working with, so then their sex partners, they all hang out together. So that's a community.
That sounds that's polyamory, not open relationships.
But it's a friend. But it's everyone knows their boundaries. Like that's the construct. Like everyone knows it's not a secret. And then like this is where it stands, and this is what's happening. It's kind of like, that's what I'm saying. Like if you take, this is where I'm trying not to be like, get off my lawn, and just be like, well, this, you shouldn't do it this way. But it's in that world. It's just the same thing. Like you have your gym friend, you have this friend. It's in that lens. It follows that same lens.
But doesn't that because I could get far more behind polyamory than I could open relationships. What you described sounds a lot more like polyamory than it does an open relationship. Because in polyamory, you're basically in a pod, in a group of people, and there's multiple intimate relationships, and there are healthy boundaries, and that is established.
But that's why it's a spectrum, right? Like you have open relationships and polyamory, and then there's a spectrum, because we're not robots, and there's feelings involved when you're committing sexually too, right? And there's other components that are involved. You have to date, you have to get to know the person. There's an emotional spectrum that's involved as well.
Yeah.
It's different. It's completely different. But to me, like there's similarities in the constructs if you take the judgment away. That's what I'm trying to say.
It's funny that you think that I'm judging it, which I'm not worried about that. What I would say is that I am far more supportive of polyamory than I am of open relationships. I think a monogamous, people who are like trying to turn a monogamous relationship into an open relationship is a recipe for disaster. But if you have the mindset of polyamory, of having multiple intimate relationships and being open and having this community of that, I think that is far more likely to succeed. And I think it's a far healthier route than trying to turn a monogamous relationship into an open relationship. That's
right, because I would argue the opposite. Really? I would argue that the open relationship is the healthier way to go, because number one, you're prioritizing the emotional health of the relationship, right? And then you're telling both partners are basically saying at a certain point, once this is not the priority, you got to cut off. To me, that's the healthier lens versus we have all these intimate partners that are involved. That to me, it gets sloppy.
Interesting. You differ on that side.
But we don't know. So once again, like we're just giving our opinions. And once again, I'm not saying we're just figuring this out. We're just learning.
Well, like I said, our job is to help people have the best tools possible for the vision they have for their relationships, right? We can only talk from statistics, numbers, clinical experience. We can only talk from that side. And I can share there's a little bit of, opinion in terms of like our own personal beliefs and opinions on these subjects. But by and large, it's really up to an individual to choose. And as long as, you have to so clearly know yourself, and your partner has to do the same. And the bottom line is that the vast majority of one person doesn't know themselves, let alone two people in a relationship know themselves well enough to make this work. And that's what's contributing to a 92% failure rate.
That's an excellent point. So you have to really know yourself and know the relationship very well to even move to this level.
Correct.
Yeah, agreed. Or else it's a recipe for disaster.
All right. I like this episode. All of our, disagreements, but we're ending on something that we agree with.
Something positive, man.
Yeah. It's all been positive. Come on, bro. All right. I'm telling Aki that you want to have an open relationship. And now we're done. Bye.